especially in the Western world, Western culture in the United States, this idea of being productive all the time, I think causes so much stress, so much anxiety. It causes us to constantly be doing rather than being ever, which I think leads us to then be out of sync with nature because, we have the modern technology on the one side, productivity on the other side, and those two coming together is like sort of the perfect storm for us to not be in tune with nature.
Welcome to Zestful Aging, the podcast where we celebrate aging with vibrance and we defy the stereotypes of what it means to age. I'm your host, Nicole Christina, a psychotherapist of more than 30 years, here to introduce you to my off-the-mainstream guests who will energize and inspire you. My hope is to create optimism about getting older and help you cultivate zest and joy in this season of your life. And I love to hear feedback from you, my listeners. Please drop me a line at zestfulaging@gmail.com. I read every single comment. And to find out more about this podcast, hop on over to zestfulaging.com. Well, modern society has conditioned us to see aging as a depressing, deteriorating experience with a growing list of pain symptoms and an even longer list of prescription drugs. And I don't know if you've noticed, but some of the conversations I've been overhearing are really about a comparison of newly discovered ailments, and I really try to avoid those conversations. My guest today was an emergency room doctor and experienced her own health crisis. In her search for answers and healing, she was led back to Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition of her South Asian roots. So today we're going to speak with Dr. Avante Kumar Singh, who is an Ayurvedic and integrative medicine teacher. She's just written a new book, The Longevity Formula, which I highly recommend, and has the mission of honoring the passage of years and ushering in the second stage of life as a time full of vitality and wisdom, of zestful aging, if you will. And this book combines Ayurvedic principles, modern medicine to reduce inflammation, enhance cellular repair, and boost vitality. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I really loved your book because it's it's sophisticated in the science, but I also found it to be readable and it just made a lot of sense. And my understanding, very cursory understanding of Ayurveda, is that you really wanted to sync more with nature. Would you say that's is an okay thumbnail description?
Absolutely. You hit it on the head. Yeah. Ayurveda is the healing system of India. It's a sister science of yoga, and it's the oldest healing system that we know of. It's over 5,000 years old, and it has the roots of all other forms of medicine and healing. Traditional Chinese medicine, Western medicine, both come from Ayurveda. And you're exactly right. Sort of the essence of Ayurveda is that when you live in harmony with nature, you will have harmony within, and therefore you'll have optimal health and a life full of vitality. So
yeah, I mean, the idea here is that we're really not distinct from nature. We're part of nature.
Yes, we are nature, actually.
We are nature.
If you think about it, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, everything in the universe is made of the 5 elements: space, air, fire, water, and earth. And everything that means nature outside of us, but also within us, we are made of those 5 elements as well. So we are nature, quite literally.
And we know that that's not just a kind of a hippie idea, that that's been proven in all kinds of robust science.
Mhm.
Talk to me about what gets in the way in terms of our modern society. What do you see getting in the way of us? Mostly women, I would say, and let's say women over 50. What gets in the way of us being in sync with nature?
Wow, that's a big question. I think there's so many pieces there, but I would say, I mean, we're living in a modern world. We have all this technology that allows us to quote be more productive. I think
Mhm.
productivity is a big piece of this, is especially in the Western world, Western culture, in the United States at least. This idea of being productive all the time, I think, causes
Mm.
so much stress, so much anxiety. It causes us to constantly be doing rather than being ever, which I think leads us to then be out of sync with nature because, we have the modern technology on the one side, productivity on the other side. And those two coming together is like sort of the perfect storm for us to
Mhm.
not be in tune with nature, for us to not be in tune with our nature within, our internal compass, our internal voice.
Mhm.
So I would say that's true for women, but for probably most human beings that are living in a modern world.
I see. I'm just curious, in your training in medical school and residency, and you were an ER doctor, which of course is super intense. had-
Mhm.
w- were you aware, did you have a consciousness that I am no longer living sort of in sync with nature? How did that go for you?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I did. I mean, and that's actually the reason that I sort of left Western medicine that I trained in and went back to, Ayurveda, which was the medicine that I grew up with. I'm South Asian, first generation. My parents immigrated from India. And so, Ayurveda was part of our life. It was the way that we lived, it was a way of living. And when I got to my medical training, I realized I was having all of these symptoms: headaches, stomach aches, plantar fasciitis in both of my feet, weight gain, anxiety, depression. All of these things were showing up because I was not in sync with nature. I was not living according to the Ayurvedic principles that I had grown up with and that I had really sort of followed most of my life, even through college and even graduate school. I got a master's in public health before that. I was able to maintain all of those things. But when I got to
Mhm.
medical school, it
Mhm.
went all downhill. And that's when the problem started for me. And
That's
so,
interesting. Yeah.
and that realization is really what had me sort of go back to Ayurveda after I was done with my training, because I realized that for me, the integration of Western medicine with Ayurveda was sort of where I wanted to be. That's the medicine I wanted to practice.
Did you get pressure from your colleagues or friends about leaving the sort of full bore Western medicine?
Yeah, for sure. My parents thought I was bananas. That too,
Ah,
first generation South Asian.
yes.
And I'm the elder daughter of two. And my parents just looked at me and they said, "Are you crazy? You're going to
Mm.
study what? You're going to practice Ayurveda after you went to medical school and have, become an ER doctor?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." So yes, absolutely. I got a lot of sort of quizzical looks and people thinking I was off my rocker. And this was, 17 years ago.
Mm.
And fast forward now, and I'm sort of now at the forefront of this movement in the United States. So full circle for me.
How did you, I mean, you'll have to forgive me, and I always say this to
Oh,
I am a psychotherapist, and
yeah.
I'm just so curious about
Mhm.
your your internal process here because of
Yeah.
course we know being a doctor is sort of the ultimate, and especially from an immigrant family,
Mhm.
and you say you're the oldest and all of this, you reach the pinnacle of success, and then you were saying, actually, it's not what it seems, and I'm going to do something different. How did you find the clarity, I guess, to say, no, this is what I need to do?
Well, I think there were a couple of things. All through my medical training, what I saw all the time, every day, was I saw the roots of Ayurveda. I saw the Ayurvedic basis for everything I was learning. So every time I would learn something, I'm like, oh, I see that in Ayurveda. That's something that we learned. I was starting to make those connections already when I was in medical school and in my training. So that's the first thing. So I was always interested, and it was always in the back of my mind. But I think it's when I really started to see patients and I realized I wasn't really helping them. Okay, yes, I was in the ER, and that's part of what we do in the ER. But I felt like I was seeing, sort of the frequent flyers in the ER who would come back with the same issues and then an additional issue. And I started to think about, okay, well, what's going on here? And then the third piece of that was really my own health crisis and realizing that I wasn't finding all the answers in Western medicine. And I needed to look back to where I came from, because up until this point in medical school and medical training, I had had really good health. I was really lucky that way. And so for me, it was sort of all three of these things that really drove me to say, okay, how do you really want to live your life? What is the work that you really want to do in the world? And I realized for me, it was really to help people understand that there is this internal healing that happens. There's this inner wisdom that you have, that the healer actually is within. And that sort of became the medicine that I wanted to practice. And so that's really what gave me the strength, is those three things.
Yeah, you know this as well as I do, but often health crises open up new doors.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. One of the things you talked about was that at 28, your health was not as good as your 88-year-old grandfather's. Yeah.
Yeah. That was something I realized back then, and it's something I realized later. Really the inspiration for writing this second book, The Longevity Formula, came out of sort of a realization about 5 years ago when I was turning 48, 49, that I was approaching my 50th birthday. And sort of what was the next era of my life going to be about? What kind of work did I want to do? What was the impact I wanted to have? Going sort of on the cusp of what I call, what we talk about in Ayurveda as the wisdomhood years, right? What did I want that to look like for me? And a lot of introspection, once again, went back to thinking about my grandfather, who was probably in his 50s when he used to come and visit us here in the United States. And I was, a kid, and how vital he was, and how healthy he was, and how sound mind he was, and the lifestyle that led to that. And, the fact that I saw my aunts and uncles, my parents, growing older with such vitality and sharpness, and how they looked at the world, and how they could, their memories were intact. They were, fully engaged with their community, with their family, and their work, right? And so really for me, that internal process of seeing that wisdomhood doesn't have to look like what I had grown up seeing in the media in the United States as a kid, dentures and orthopedic shoes and nursing homes and all these things, that it was exactly the opposite that I was experiencing from my family. And so that really sort of was a turning point for me of thinking about, okay, so these elders in my life are living with this longevity. They have this vitality, even as they're growing older chronologically. What's the secret sauce here? What's going on here? And obviously an Ayurvedic lifestyle, but I wanted to dig into the science and see, how does that correlate? Where are we discovering what the reasons are for the things that we were doing in Ayurveda for 5,000 years that was leading to this longevity? And that's really sort of the wheels started to turn from there.
And of course, we can't ignore the cultural piece.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the differences in the perspective of aging in the Western and the Eastern worlds?
Yeah. And, I mean, and again, I kind of alluded to that, what I had grown up seeing in the media in Western culture was very different than what I was experiencing at home within my family, within my South Asian community that I grew up with, which is the fundamental difference of how we look at aging. In the Western world, and even in my Western training, aging is sort of looked at this as this thing of this decline where, your body starts to break down, your mind starts to break down, right? You're not functional, you can't really contribute. It's sort of looked at this very negative thing, right? Versus in the East, in India, in Ayurveda, aging is seen as this time of wisdom and great contribution to families. And it's also seen as a time when you can be very vital. You may walk a little slower. You may move a little slower. You may not be able to be as, quote, productive every day, but you are living with vitality because you are still able to live independently. You're going for many walks every day. You're walking well, you're functioning well, your memory is still there. You're not having cognitive decline, all of these things. And so, and aging is also looked at as very valuable in the sense of community and what you can contribute not only to your family, but to your community at large. And so there was these two sort of opposing views almost in my mind.
Oh, sure.
Of how aging is regarded. And that's something that I think, I talk about this in the book, is this term anti-aging that we use in the West. I find it a very problematic way to look at things, is because why should we be anti anything, specifically aging? Because aging is inevitable. We can't stop that process, right? And so why not work with it? And how can we age with grace, with vitality? And that's where the longevity piece comes in, right?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, Zesties. Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, I would so appreciate if you would share with just one person, like a family member or a friend who would enjoy and benefit from Zestful Aging Podcast. Thank you so much. You talk about throughout the book different behaviors, different choices. I know it's a lot to ask because this is a huge science, and I understand that. But some of the things I was noting overlap with some things I know about getting out in nature. You talk about getting out in natural light. You talk about movement. Can you sort of summarize a little bit about what, people might recognize as a different way to be and to be in nature?
Yeah, let me maybe back up a little bit and talk about sort of what the longevity formula is, and then I can get into that because it's sort of all connected.
Yes.
And for people to understand, for the listeners to really understand why I suggest the practices I do, I want to give you some context for that. So the longevity formula is specifically sort of my understanding of what leads to longevity. And it's based on this idea in Ayurveda that if you nourish the tissues, the 7 tissue layers of the body, you will have a longer life filled with vitality and functionality, right? Longevity, really. And the way that you nourish tissues from a Western standpoint is really to decrease the accumulation of cellular damage in the tissues. And there's 2 ways you can do that. You can increase cellular repair, right? You can decrease inflammation, right? Those are the 2 main factors of how to do that. And so really, when we're talking about what you can do to increase your longevity, these practices that I talk about, it's really about looking at the 5 longevity switches that actually can help you to nourish your tissues and decrease inflammation and increase cellular repair, really to decrease the accumulation of damaged cells, right? That's really what causes depletion of the tissues and aging. And so there's 5 longevity switches that you can think about just in general when you're thinking about what you can do to increase and support your longevity. And the 5 switches are, first, to remove toxins.
Mm-hmm.
The second is to add prana or life force energy, which is available in the universe. The third is to move that prana through the system, through the body, the mind, and the spirit. The fourth is to sync with nature. And the fifth is to feed the system or nourish the system, right? Once you start understanding those 5 longevity switches, you start to see all of the things that you can do on a daily basis that will support your longevity. Because when you go back, as you start with the practice and you go backwards, you see that it's nourishing the tissues, and then it's also decreasing inflammation and increasing cellular repair. Now, that was a lot that I just said.
No, but it's so sensible. I mean, it just makes so much sense. In terms of just an orientation towards our body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really, what I aimed to try and do when I wrote this book, is that I really wanted people to understand, why is it that so many of us in integrative medicine, regardless of our training or what healing system we're sort of teaching about, we all agree on, the fact that you should be getting out in nature.
Mm-hmm.
One of the examples you gave, and getting natural sunlight into your eyes, before 10 a.m. That is, widely agreed upon, whether it's an integrative medicine doctor who's doing functional medicine or an Ayurvedic practitioner. And I really wanted to dig into, why is that? And the reason is exactly what I talked about. It's about the longevity formula. It's very sensible. It makes sense because you understand then that this is not just a recommendation that try and do it. You understand the science and how it actually affects your body, mind, and spirit, how it actually contributes to longevity. And then I find that when you understand that, you're more apt to do it. You're more inclined and committed to doing something that is very simple to do, but you don't make excuses and you actually do it. Right?
I think also there's a psychological benefit to feeling like you're the one, you have an owner's manual on yourself. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that we live in a toxic culture. We can talk about that later, and that has a huge impact on us. But to know that if I want to care for myself, here are the things that make sense. I need to get out in the sunlight. It's very different than taking a fistful of supplements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, back to your comment about, we live in a toxic world. This is actually something that I really talk about a lot, is that we do live in a modern world that is toxic, that has toxins in it. And unless we are going to isolate ourselves and sort of put ourselves in, bubble wrap and in a corner in a room, we can't avoid the toxins that are everywhere in this modern world. And, I had a very personal experience of that in the past year while I was writing this book. I had a breast cancer diagnosis that kind of came out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And what I have learned through this whole process is that Ayurveda is protective of your health. It really protects you so that when you have some inevitable symptom, illness, diagnosis, because you live in a toxic world, right? You can't stop that from happening. You are more resilient. You are able to better respond to whatever issue is happening, whatever diagnosis, symptom, illness you're dealing with. You are more resilient. It's protective of your health. And that's what I really...
Yeah, there's a health buffer.
Sorry?
Like a health buffer.
Yes, absolutely. It's a buffer. Exactly. And that, I think, is sort of the key here, is to understand that these small practices that you can do every day, they really contribute to protecting your health. That is really sort of the bottom line here from my perspective. And I can give you a little bit of background why I'm so sort of committed and really, really, strong in sort of my perspective on this. And it's because, with this breast cancer diagnosis that sort of came out of nowhere, I have no genetic factors. I have no family history. It really, really upset me. I was really pissed off, honestly, because I was like, are you kidding? I've lived an Ayurvedic lifestyle my whole life. I teach this. This is the work I'm doing. And now I have breast cancer. And it's because I live in a toxic world. What can I do? Right. But what I experienced was that from the day that I was diagnosed to the day that I had my last radiation treatment was exactly 7 months. Because I did have all of the standard medical treatment. I made that decision, but I did it in an integrative way. I was doing supplements. I was doing all kinds of other therapies as well, acupuncture, nutrition, fasting, all of these things, along with my traditional, conventional medical treatment. But to complete all of that treatment in 7 months with a very aggressive treatment plan, which was 8 cycles of chemotherapy spaced 2 weeks apart, a bilateral mastectomy, and then 15 radiation treatments. I did that in 7 months. Actually, it was a little less because the first 3 weeks were the diagnosis period of all the tests and everything. What I realize is that it's not because, yes, I can speak the language. I called in some favors. I'm the first to admit that, right? I was able to get through the system a little faster because of those things. But at the end of the day, my healing team would not have allowed me to do the next treatment. They would have delayed my treatment if I was not able to handle it. And I had all of the complications. I had blood transfusions. I had an infection for which I was hospitalized. I had to have fluids all the time. I nausea, vomiting, all the neuropathies, all of the things. I had all of those things. But I was so resilient. I was able to bounce back at each step and never delay treatment. My body had been protected. My mind has been protected. My spirit had been protected because I was doing these Ayurvedic practices. And that is really the conclusion I came to, is that Ayurveda is protective. All of these things, all these small things that we're taught or we're told to do or, suggested that we should do, eat low inflammatory foods, get outside in sunlight, do some movement every day, connect with other people. They're all protective of our health. And that's why they matter so much.
And they're not difficult.
No, they're not. They're not at all. They're quite simple. And I actually think that, from a psychological point of view, and maybe this is part of Western culture, we could talk about that, is that I feel like we almost dismiss things that are, quote, simple and easy, right? Simple, as not being valuable or not being effective.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There's that connection, that psychological connection that's made that everything that is worth doing has to be difficult and hard and has to be a huge, you have to put all your might into it.
And expensive.
And expensive. That's a big one. There's a lot of fancy tests that you can have. There's a lot of, wearable technology that you can have, that is expensive, that, will help with longevity. But I really think that those are all extra tools to use. They're not the things that will really create longevity for us.
And in fact, I find them distracting. I'm a big forest bather, and there's tons of science behind that, of course. But if I go with a couple particular friends, they want to tell me how many steps we've done, what our heart rate is. And I feel like that detracts from some of the experience of just enjoying, smelling, feeling, whatever it is. In upstate New York, it might be sleet, but there's also owls and also, all the nature. And to tell me, well, we just did 10,000 steps, I don't think is necessarily beneficial.
Well, and I understand what you're saying, because I tend to agree a lot on most of those things. But I also know that a lot of people in the Western world, the Western mind wants to know why, right? Wants the data, the proof. I often joke with colleagues who are, maybe challenging me on things with, Ayurveda, of like, where's the data? And many times I'll say to them jokingly, well, isn't 5,000 years of data enough for you?
Right.
And plus all the studies that show, many of the things that we do in Ayurveda, it shows that we have the data and the science that proves that it is beneficial, right? So that aside, but yes, I think that the Western mind wants to know, and that's why these, wearable tech and knowing how many steps you did, people sort of glom onto that, and that becomes really important. So, I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think what happens is that people get overly invested in that and obsessed with that, where it determines sort of the perspective of themselves of having done a good job or a bad job, or being good or being bad, or being healthy or not healthy. And that's where I think the problems start.
To keep
but at the same time, say it again.
To keep it in perspective is important.
Exactly. Because I think it can be a really helpful tool for many people, but it can also be a very distracting and damaging tool for many people too. So,
it occurs to me that the timing of this book really is perhaps perfect, because many of us in the mental health field are recognizing the great mental health crises we're in, and that this promise of tech it hasn't fulfilled a promise. In fact, people are more lonely and depressed and anxious than ever before, even if they have the brand new iPhone. And I wonder if there's this, this sort of reckoning coming where people are saying, look, I just got the new iPhone with the AI. I've got all of this stuff. I'm, financially stable. I've got all of this stuff. I'm not feeling well. I'm not feeling healthy. I'm not feeling a sense of purpose. And I wonder if, now is such a good time to reconsider the world that we live in and that we believed in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, is probably something that was in my mind when I was thinking about this book. I think it's in the zeitgeist also right now, right? Just in general with, everything from climate to environmental to political to I mean, there's so many things happening in the world right now that I do agree with you. That a lot of people are just looking to get back to basics in a way of sort of like, how did we do things before? Because the way we're doing things right now is not working.
Yes.
Right. And so I think that people are really open to thinking about things differently because they really just want to feel good. They want to feel safe. They want to feel connected. They want to feel healthy. And so, yes, I would agree with you. And thank you for, pointing that out. I do think that that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that even, with my clients, just, the scrolling is leaving me, my soul feeling sucked out. It's not a nourishing thing. So that's, it's very interesting. I wanted to let you talk about, you have a beautiful website. It's really well done. And also you have a podcast, you have 2 books. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. I have a website. It's avantikumarsingh.com. It's my full name. All the things are there, so you can get connected to me in all the ways there, whether it's buying my book, my course, going to my podcast, Instagram. But I'm on social media. Instagram is usually the only one that I'm really on. I do a lot of education and discussion there. It's Avanti Kumar Singh. And my podcast is called The Health Catalyst. And so we discuss all of these topics and more. So I'd love to connect with listeners.
And I listen to your podcast, and you have such a beautiful way of interacting with your guests, and you have some really great guests on. I appreciated it. Well, thank you so much for bringing all this to light. I am going to heed your advice very soon. Go outside, and I love some of the just so basic and so sensible, and makes so much sense. I mean, obviously, you really talk about the data, why this is important. It's not just, this is a fun idea that you had. It's really well documented.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've loved being with you, so I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Zestful Aging. If you like the podcast, please share it with some of your friends. Our theme song is All I Did Was Wait for You by Kjartan Abel. Visit Kjartan-Abel, that's KJARTAN-Abel, ABEL.com to hear more of Kjartan's work. And our technical director is Stephen Litweiler. And stay tuned next week for another interview with a fascinating and inspiring guest. See you then.